Very recently, I purchased Spitfire Audio's Abbey Road Orchestra Violins 1, and I wanted to compare it to the two other string libraries that I own. I'm not going to tell you what they are until the very end of the video, but they all have the same exact MIDI, the same dynamic curve, and all of them are out of the box, meaning that I didn't do any changes to their actual sound. Um, I want to hear your opinion on what all three of them sound like in the comments below before I actually tell you what sample libraries they are. I want to hear your honest opinions and reviews. So, without further ado, here are the string libraries. All right, so I feel like that Franken strings at the end, where I combined all three of them, shows how similar they all are, which makes sense. It's all violins one. But I think it's important to recognize that at some point it is just splitting hairs, and sometimes you should just grab whatever tool is at your disposal and use that. That being said, I do have some notes on all three demos. For one, I feel like it has a clean and dry sound. I also feel like for Violins 1, it's extremely warm, considering how bright most other libraries are. I found it to be very dynamic. From the lowest dynamic to the loudest dynamic, there was a big volume change, and I feel like the strings actually had a lot of development to them, depending on its dynamic. There was a lot of white noise in the upper register, especially as you were playing harder with higher notes. And I found the sound to be extremely processed, meaning that there's a lot of artifacts that you can hear from the actual processing, which isn't the biggest deal, especially when you have a whole mix, but when it's soloed like this, you can hear it a lot. For demo 2, I found the sound to be really wet, which can be a good or a bad thing, depending if you want to mix this with other libraries. I found it to be slightly bright, but mainly it was very non-committal. It wasn't really bright or dark. I found it to be moderately dynamic. So the dynamics are definitely there, but it's definitely not exaggerated or extreme. And coupled with that, it's a very inoffensive performance. I almost want to use the word sterile to define it. That also means there's a lot of clarity and consistency with that, which might be something you want. I also found towards the end of the demo, there were some harsh tones in the upper register. The third one, in my opinion, is the worst out of all three of these, and it has a bright stereo sound. I think it struggled with the dynamic changes, and the porto was extremely exaggerated, almost to a fault, I would say. And I found that there was some white noise in the upper register, just like example 1. So, this is your last chance to come up with opinions on all three of the demos before I share what products they actually are. So, what was the first demo? 1, it was Cinematic Studio Strings, a beloved classic among many composers. I definitely think when you look at all the other strings, it does have that warm sound that I was talking about before. The dynamics were certainly there, especially with the expressive legato that I used. You could tell that there was a difference in the performance depending on the legato that I selected. And I do think that Cinematic Studio Strings, the one downfall of it has a great studio sound, but it's very processed. It doesn't sound completely natural when soloed, but it also fits extremely well in a giant mix. This sits at about $400, and you get all of the strings, which I think is a completely fair price for what you're getting. And you do get a lot of different articulations to play with here. And I don't want to use the word constantly, but it has had many updates over the past few years. And I know a lot of the fan base behind Cinematic Studio Strings is excited about the recent 1.7 update that improved the legato. So, what was Demo 2? It was Spitfire Audio Abbey Road Orchestra. I chose the first articulation that came up, the Performance Legato Extended, and I didn't want to be super, with Cinematic Studio Strings, I got to control the legato speed based off of the velocity. Meanwhile, I think Abbey Road Orchestra has a lot more of a complex system underlaying it, where it takes into consideration the speed of your notes and the velocity of your notes to choose the exact articulation. As of recording, this library just came out today, so I haven't had that much time to learn how to use it, which I think makes it a great example for what you're getting out of the box, especially when you first get it. So as you can see, there were changes in the velocity, and that's how it selected each legato transition to use. I think it's extremely complicated, and I don't know if that's entirely a good thing. There's almost too many different types of legato where it's hard to know which one to use in any given situation. But at the same time, you do get a lot of flexibility with the different legatos that are available. I found that this was extremely wet. Even when you turn down the release, you can still hear a lot of that room, that Spitfire Abbey Road 1 room, which is an amazing room. So if there is any room to have in your samples, it's this one. But there is still a lot of that room in all the samples. Like I said, I found it to be slightly bright, moderately dynamic, especially for, Abbey Road 1, the first of the tuned instruments in the Abbey Road Orchestra series. I am surprised by the lack of dynamics here. It's still there, it's still expressive, but I would consider it sterile compared to what my expectations were going in to this library. I still think it has a very clean sound, though, and that's definitely something good to look out for. So for number 3, the last one, obviously I think this one struggled the most, and that's because it is Symphony Series String Ensemble. This one is not my favorite strings library in the world. It was the first one that I had when I was first learning how to write music, and so I kind of know all of the little quirks about this strings library, which definitely makes me biased, especially in my estimations of it. But I definitely think this struggles with the dynamics. I think the controls here for the expression, attack, release, and the brightness are very strangely put, and they don't affect the sound in a way that makes me want to use them. I find the portamento to be greatly exaggerated, and you can still hear a lot of that white noise in the upper register, just like Cinematic Studio Strings. But compounded with the other issues, I think it's everything kind of comes together to this very difficult experience. That being said, though, when you play all 3 of them back to back, there are obviously differences between them, but I definitely think this is competent enough for any composers that can't afford, say, Cinematic Studio Strings or Abbey Road Orchestra Violin 1. So I definitely think it's the weakest out of all three, but that doesn't mean it is completely useless. Especially if you get it in a bundle like Complete, I definitely think this is a good tool to have at your disposal. So that's my review of all three of these strings libraries. Let me know what you think, and if there's anything else that you would like me to compare in the future, let me know. Thanks.